In March 2012, the body of 33-year-old Sarah Blake was found in her patrol car at Redstone Canyon, Colorado, sparking an investigation that would expose a web of lies, betrayal, and violence. What began as a secret affair between highway patrol officers Sarah Blake and Jason Hart unraveled into a chilling tale of obsession and murder. The events leading up to that tragic morning started over a year earlier, in late 2010, during quiet night shifts on the winding highways of Redstone, where stolen glances and whispered confessions would set the stage for a devastating betrayal. It was a cold, quiet morning on March 6, 2012, when Tom Grayson, a retired school teacher, decided to take his usual hike through Redstone Canyon. The canyon was known for its breathtaking views and serene atmosphere, a sanctuary for those seeking solace away from the hustle and noise of the small town below. As Tom neared a bend in the trail, the faint sound of an idling engine reached his ears, standing out against the natural silence of the area. It was unusual, especially this deep into the canyon, where cars rarely ventured. Curiosity drove Tom closer. At first, he could only see the top of the car, white with the distinct markings of a highway patrol vehicle. It was parked at an odd angle near the edge of a ridge, its front wheels slightly tilted, as though it had been abandoned in haste. The engine hummed steadily, filling the crisp morning air with an unsettling monotony. As Tom approached, the tension in his chest grew. Something wasn't right. When he got close enough to peer inside, his heart sank. Slumped in the driver's seat was a woman in uniform. Her head rested unnaturally to the side, and though the tinted windows made it hard to see clearly, the dark bruises forming on her neck told a grim story. Tom stepped back, his hands trembling as he fumbled for his phone. The call to 911 was panicked, but precise, and the dispatcher quickly assured him help was on the way. As Tom waited, he couldn't stop staring at the car, the woman inside, and the eerie sense of finality that hung in the air. Within minutes, emergency responders arrived. The scene quickly became chaotic, as paramedics confirmed what Tom already feared. Officer Sarah Blake was dead. The realization spread like wildfire through the ranks of the first responders. Sarah wasn't just another victim. She was one of their own. A dedicated officer with nearly 5 years on the force, Sarah had a reputation for being fiercely loyal and hardworking. She had been a mentor to younger officers, a source of comfort for victims of roadside accidents, and a symbol of strength in the small community of Redstone. As investigators processed the scene, the tragedy began to unravel in stark, undeniable detail. Sarah's patrol car showed no signs of struggle inside. There were no signs of a forced entry, no shattered glass, no defensive wounds on her hands. It was as though the attack had come suddenly, catching her completely off guard. Yet, the bruises on her neck told a different story. This had been up close, personal, fueled by intent. Whoever had done this had not only known Sarah, but had likely looked into her eyes as they ended her life. By the evening of March 6th, the news had already reached the rest of the town. Redstone was a close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else, and Sarah's death struck like a bolt of lightning. Neighbors who had seen her laughing over coffee just days before were now grieving the loss of a woman they considered a protector. The media descended quickly, their headlines capturing the shock and outrage. Beloved officer found dead in remote canyon. 2 days later, on March 8th, 2012, Police Chief Rick Harrison stood in front of a crowd of reporters at the station. He was a man known for his composure, but on that day, he carried the weight of his grief openly. His voice was measured, but heavy as he spoke about Sarah's dedication to her work and the hole her death had left in the department. Sarah, he explained, had been more than just an officer. She had been a light in their lives, someone who went above and beyond the call of duty. The cameras captured his every word, broadcasting the raw emotion of a department mourning one of its best. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure to solve the case was mounting. Redstone wasn't accustomed to this kind of violence, and the thought of a killer walking freely among them was unbearable. As the days stretched into weeks, the investigation intensified. Detectives pored over Sarah's last known movements, retracing her steps with painstaking precision. Surveillance footage from her routine patrols revealed nothing unusual. On the day of her death, she had stopped at a diner around 10:30 a.m., exchanging pleasantries with the staff before continuing on her route. Her shift had ended at 4 p.m., but no one had seen her after that. The timeline was frustratingly narrow, and investigators struggled to piece together where she had gone or whom she might have met. Interviews with Sarah's colleagues painted a picture of a woman who was respected but fiercely private. She had her close friends in the department, but there were whispers of recent tensions, specifically with Officer Jason Hart, a senior officer known for his charm and professionalism. Several co-workers recalled heated exchanges between Sarah and Jason in the weeks leading up to her death. Their arguments had been quiet but intense, the kind of discussions that left the air thick with unresolved tension. It wasn't until March 20th, 2012, that the pieces began to fall into place. Investigators had grown increasingly interested in Jason, whose alibi for the evening of Sarah's death had raised more questions than answers. Initially, he claimed to have been at home with his wife, Laura, watching television. But Laura's statements didn't align with his. When questioned privately, she admitted that Jason had been acting strangely that evening. He had gone out for a drive late at night, something he rarely did, and returned hours later looking pale and distracted. She had also noticed scratches on his neck the next morning, scratches he dismissed as accidental, but refused to explain. Surveillance footage from a gas station near Redstone Canyon further implicated Jason. His patrol car had been captured on camera around the time Sarah's car was discovered. Combined with the inconsistent alibi and Laura's observations, the evidence began to paint a damning picture. Jason, once considered a trusted member of the team, was now under the microscope. As the department inched closer to uncovering the truth, the weight of Sarah's death hung heavy over them all. She had been a beacon of hope for so many, and now the possibility that one of their own might have betrayed her was almost too much to bear. Still, the detectives pressed on, determined to bring justice to the woman who had given so much to her community. March 20th, 2012, marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation, one that would take them deeper into the darkness of betrayal and deception. Sarah Blake's life had never been easy, but she had always been a fighter. At 33 years old, she carried the weight of her past like a quiet scar, a reminder of the abusive marriage she had escaped. For years, she endured, putting on a brave face for her two young daughters, who were her entire world. When she finally left her husband and moved to Redstone, joining the highway patrol had felt like a fresh start. The job gave her purpose and a sense of identity beyond being a mother. Her colleagues admired her for her compassion and dedication, though her fiery determination sometimes rubbed people the wrong way. Sarah was not one to back down, and her strong will often put her at odds with authority. It was during one of her long night shifts, about a year into the job, that Sarah first got to know Jason Hart. He was 38 years old, married, with 3 children, and he carried himself with a confidence that immediately drew people in. Jason had a charisma that made him stand out among his peers. He was a model officer with a spotless record, someone others looked up to. But behind the charm was a man who craved validation, someone who thrived on being admired and needed. Sarah saw that vulnerability in him, even though it wasn't something he openly showed. Their relationship began innocently. Late-night patrols often paired them together, and they quickly fell into an easy rhythm. They talked about their lives, her struggles as a single mom, his challenges juggling family and work. At first, it was comforting for Sarah to have someone to confide in, someone who seemed to understand her. For Jason, it was an escape from the pressures of his home life. His marriage to Laura had grown distant, weighed down by years of unspoken resentment and the relentless demands of raising 3 children. As weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. Those long nights turned into stolen moments, quiet conversations that lingered too long, hands that brushed just a little too often. Before either of them fully acknowledged it, they had crossed a line. What began as an emotional connection quickly turned physical, and soon they were meeting outside of work, always in secret. Redstone Canyon became their refuge, a place where they could be together without fear of being seen. The remote, rugged landscape offered them the privacy they craved, but it also added a layer of risk that seemed to heighten their passion. For Sarah, the relationship filled a void she had carried for years. After leaving her abusive marriage, she had sworn off love, focusing solely on her daughters and her career. But Jason made her feel alive again, made her believe that she could have more. Yet, even in those stolen moments of intimacy, there was always a nagging doubt, a sense that their connection was fragile, built on a foundation that could crumble at any moment. For Jason, the affair was a dangerous balancing act. He was a husband, a father, a respected officer, and now a man living a double life. At first he justified it to himself. His marriage, he thought, was already broken, and Sarah offered him something his wife couldn't: admiration, excitement, a sense of being wanted. But as the months went on, the weight of his lies began to take its toll. He became more distant at home, often snapping at Laura or avoiding her questions about his late-night shifts. His guilt manifested in subtle ways, nights of restless pacing and overcompensation at work to maintain his image. By early 2012, the cracks in their relationship began to show. Sarah had grown tired of the secrecy, tired of being a shadow in Jason's life. She wanted more, a commitment, a future. But every time she brought it up, Jason deflected, making promises he never intended to keep. Their arguments became more frequent, their once passionate connection now tainted by mistrust and frustration. Sarah, who had fought so hard to rebuild her life, began to realize that Jason was dragging her into chaos. On the evening of March 5th, 2012, everything came to a head. Sarah had spent the day thinking, replaying their arguments in her mind, and by the time her shift ended, she was ready to confront him. At the station, she waited until Jason was alone, then cornered him. Their conversation started quietly, but quickly escalated. Sarah's voice trembled with anger as she laid out her demands. She was done hiding, done being his secret. If he didn't leave his wife and commit to her, she would expose their affair. Jason felt the walls closing in. He had spent months convincing himself he could juggle everything, but Sarah's ultimatum shattered that illusion. The thought of his wife finding out, of his colleagues seeing him not as a model officer, but as a liar and a cheat, terrified him. Desperation took hold, and he did the only thing he could think of. He asked Sarah to meet him later, away from the station, so they could talk privately. Sarah agreed, though her trust in him was wearing thin. That night, as the town slept, they met at Redstone Canyon. The spot had once been their sanctuary, but now it felt heavy with tension. The argument that began at the station reignited, each of them throwing accusations and grievances like weapons. Sarah, emboldened by her frustration, pushed harder reminding Jason of all the times he had let her down. Jason, cornered and unraveling, tried to regain control, but her words cut deep, each one peeling back the carefully constructed facade he had spent years building. At some point, the argument shifted. Sarah turned to leave, her body language making it clear that she was done. And in that moment, something inside Jason snapped. Fear, anger, and desperation collided in a blinding surge of emotion. He reached for her, his hands trembling, and in an instant, his actions became irreversible. The struggle was brief, but brutal. When it was over, Sarah was slumped in the driver's seat of her patrol car, her lifeless body a haunting contrast to the woman who had once been so full of fire. Jason stepped back, his chest heaving, his mind racing. The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't know how long he stood there, staring at what he had done. But eventually, the gravity of his actions set in. He fled, leaving Sarah behind in the dark, her car idling quietly as the canyon swallowed the sound. By the time the sun rose on March 6th, 2012, the secret Jason had fought so hard to protect had become his undoing. The investigation into Sarah Blake's murder consumed the small town of Redstone. From the moment her body was discovered on March 6th, 2012, the case had gripped the community with fear and suspicion. It wasn't just the loss of a beloved officer. It was the chilling reality that someone close to her had likely betrayed her. The detectives, led by the seasoned Chief Rick Harrison, worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Every piece of evidence, every lead, was a step toward justice. But each discovery also brought new layers of complexity to the case. Forensic analysts began their work on Sarah's patrol car immediately. The vehicle was towed from the canyon and meticulously examined in a controlled lab environment. The interior of the car told its own story, one that no eyewitness could recount. Fibers embedded in the passenger seat matched the fabric of Jason Hart's uniform, and faint smudges of his fingerprints were found on the steering wheel and door handles. These details were subtle, almost as if he had tried to hide his presence. But the fibers and prints formed the first pieces of a damning puzzle. Meanwhile, the detectives reviewed hours of surveillance footage from Redstone's sparse network of security cameras. By March 12, 2012, they had uncovered a critical lead. Grainy footage from a gas station near the entrance to the canyon showed Jason's patrol car driving past at 10:47 p.m. on the night of the murder. While this alone wasn't enough to prove guilt, it shattered Jason's earlier claim that he had been home that evening. The footage placed him in the vicinity of the crime scene, raising questions he could no longer avoid. As the evidence mounted, the detectives began conducting interviews with Sarah's colleagues. Those who had worked closely with her spoke of her fiery spirit and dedication to her work, but some also mentioned the tension that had been brewing between her and Jason. One officer described overhearing quiet but heated exchanges between them in the break room, their voices low but their body language unmistakably strained. Another recalled how Sarah had seemed distracted in the weeks leading up to her death, as though she were carrying a burden she couldn't share. These testimonies painted a picture of a relationship that had soured, a connection that was far more personal than professional. By March 20th, 2012, the pressure on Jason began to show. Those who knew him well noticed subtle changes in his behavior. At work, his usual confident demeanor was replaced with agitation. He avoided eye contact with his colleagues and took frequent, unexplained breaks. At home, the cracks in his composure were even more evident. His wife, Laura, noticed how he had started drinking late at night, sitting alone in the dark with a bottle of whiskey he normally reserved for special occasions. Laura also couldn't ignore the obsessive way Jason had been cleaning their family car. On multiple occasions, she found him in the driveway, well past midnight, scrubbing the interior with an intensity that bordered on manic. When she asked him what he was doing, he dismissed her questions with short, curt answers. But Laura wasn't convinced. Her husband, once so steady and predictable, was unraveling before her eyes. Detectives, meanwhile, continued to tighten the noose around Jason. His alibi, already shaky, was further dismantled when Laura reluctantly admitted during questioning that she hadn't actually seen Jason for most of the night Sarah was killed. She explained that he had left the house after dinner, claiming he needed to clear his head. He returned hours later, pale and distant, brushing off her concerns with vague reassurances. Laura's testimony was not only a blow to Jason's credibility, but also a heartbreaking revelation of the lies that had corroded their marriage. By March 30th, 2012, the investigation reached its breaking point. Early that morning, the quiet streets of Redstone were interrupted by the arrival of police cars at Daniel Hart's home. His children, still in their pajamas, stood in the doorway, watching as officers knocked on the door. Daniel, pale and stiff, opened it, already aware of what was coming. Without resistance, he was handcuffed and led to the waiting car. Behind him, his wife Laura stood frozen, her face betraying a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Her children clung to her legs, their confusion amplifying the weight of the moment. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Daniel Hart, once admired as a dependable officer and devoted father, was now the prime suspect in a murder that had shaken the entire town. Headlines across the state labeled him a cold-blooded killer, his once pristine reputation reduced to scandal. Pictures of Daniel in handcuffs were splashed across newspapers, forever tarnishing the image he had worked so hard to maintain. Months later, the trial became one of Redstone's most closely followed events. Prosecutors painted Daniel as a man consumed by lies and desperation, a double life that had led him to commit murder. Every piece of evidence, the fingerprints, fibers, and surveillance footage, pointed directly to him. Sarah's family and colleagues testified, sharing how her dedication and strength had impacted their lives and how her absence had left a void in the community. The defense argued that Sarah's death was not premeditated, but a tragic accident during an emotional confrontation. They attempted to shift blame by portraying Sarah as volatile, hoping to create doubt. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury was unconvinced. On June 15, 2013, Daniel was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. For Laura, the sentencing brought mixed emotions: relief for justice served, but anguish for the destruction of her family. Over the following weeks, she filed for divorce, knowing she could not raise her children under the shadow of Daniel's actions. Her oldest child, just 13, struggled to reconcile his father's crime with the man he thought he knew, while the younger two grappled with the absence and whispered gossip that followed them everywhere. Laura eventually moved them to a neighboring town, seeking a fresh start. Redstone mourned the loss of Sarah Blake. On July 4, 2013, the town gathered to dedicate Blake Memorial Park, a tribute to her legacy. A statue of Sarah in uniform was unveiled, standing as a symbol of her strength and sacrifice. Her daughters, now living with their grandparents, attended the ceremony, their faces reflecting both pride and grief. The park became a place of solace for the community, a quiet space to remember the woman who had given so much. Even as the town tried to heal, lingering questions about Daniel's past emerged. Rumors of volatile behavior, rule-bending, and another affair circulated among his former colleagues. The discovery of a cryptic note in Sarah's old locker on August 10, 2014, only deepened the mystery. The note, written in Sarah's handwriting, hinted that she had feared for her life, referencing a dangerous truth she had uncovered. Though the note did not name anyone, it raised unsettling possibilities about what else might have been hidden. For the community, the note became a chilling reminder of Sarah's unspoken fears and the secrets she took to her grave. While the case seemed closed, the questions it left behind ensured that her story would never truly fade. Redstone Canyon, once a place of peace, became a haunting symbol of tragedy, and Sarah Blake's name remained etched in the town's memory, not just for how she lived, but for the unanswered mysteries surrounding her death. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates, and be sure to check out another insane case we have. A doctor's secret affair with 3 young women ends in obsession and murder. Don't forget to let us know your thoughts in the comments below.